Good morning on this lovely October 7th. Welcome back to Community Circles and Conversations. Again, I'm Brianne Sanchez, Director of Nonprofit Relations at the Community Foundation of Greater Des Moines. And it is always really wonderful to be able to spend time on Wednesday mornings with you. I am looking forward to talking with our guests in a little bit, and we're just having a little bit of a different vibe with the waiting room this morning. So thanks for your patience if you had any struggles getting into that. If you don't have uh, yourself muted and your video off, I'd invite you to do that. And then we'll get started here in a minute. So our goals with community circles are always to build trusting relationships and share knowledge and resources with the Central Iowa nonprofit sector. Our expectations are to center our dialogue around these common goals and remain rooted to equity and inclusion. And just one final to please mute and turn off your video during the presentation and turn on as you're able to for the breakouts. So we'll go to the next slide. And then I just wanted to remind you that we have a free training coming up next week, October 14th, with Susan Howlett. She's a nationally recognized consultant who is going to talk a lot about the board's role in stewardship and stewardship strategy as it relates to fundraising. So if you haven't already, oops, I'm gonna put somebody on mute there. If you haven't already registered and you would be interested in that session, it's free. And I would encourage you, if you don't yet have a board member attending, it's always really helpful for board members to hear from consultants about the roles that they play in strategizing for fundraising and engaging. So I would really invite you, it's a free training, to pass the opportunity along to at least one member of your board to engage them in that process. We also tomorrow have a demonstration of our Give DSM 2.0 platform. That's right, you heard me. We will be relaunching our Give DSM platform with new and improved enhancements. And so we're going to be giving a demonstration around those enhancements tomorrow morning. And you're welcome to join us again. That is free, and we will be recording it if you are unable to join us. I'm just sorry, putting some folks on mute. Just a reminder, if I put you on mute now, it's going to be a little challenging in the breakout sessions, so you'll have to come back to me to unmute you. So you might want to just check your mute if you can. I see a few chats coming through. Okay, Angie, thanks for encouraging folks to sign up via the link. Wonderful. All right, we'll go to the next slide. And before I do want to also encourage you, Matt was sharing Iowa Stage has an upcoming production. If you have an event or opportunity that you'd like to share with the group this morning, go ahead and pop a link into the chat. The beauty of Zoom is that we can kind of bop around between all of these events together. So I always like on this slide to put something a little bit fun. And so we're really talking today about the secret sauce or the not so secret sauce of engaging your board members in strategizing. So I put a fun little recipe up there. I think that's like I don't know if that's the Big Mac sauce or if that's the In-N-Out Burger animal style sauce or whatever. I don't even really know. But if you want a secret sauce recipe, that's one. And then we have also 3 amazing board members who are joining us to talk about the secret sauce on strategizing within the context of nonprofit leadership and governance. We will, after we have our time with our presenters today, participate in breakouts. You're welcome to do that. And then we'll close again as we do with network updates. So we love to have this as a conversation, and I'll invite you to ask questions of the presenters in the chat if you have any. So let's go on to the next slide. And I will invite our guest speakers today to turn on their video and audio. And I see Bobby has included a link to the Women Lead Change Central Iowa Conference. Great, wonderful. Keep adding those in for everybody. And every step, Art of Compassion tomorrow night. Good luck, Julie. That's great. All right, we've got Megan, Peg, and Libby. And Megan, I'm going to unmute you. So you can join our, actually, if you want to stay on until your time, that's fine too. Okay, so I just wanted to invite you all. You're from very different organizations. Libby, Mid-Iowa Health Foundation, we've talked about, is a private foundation. You also have experience leading on the Goodwill of Central Iowa Board. And do you want to give any other background kind of to your leadership to share with the room this morning?
Oh, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Brianne. I've served on a variety of boards over the years in Central Iowa, anywhere from Health and Human Services to Blank Children's Hospital and the Drake Board of Trustees. So I look at it from a lot of different perspectives.
Wonderful, thank you. And then we have Peg Armstrong Gustafson, who's joining us. Peg is chair for the Blank Park Zoo. And then I know you're also on the Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation board, where my husband works. So we both get to know Peg. And then do you have any other board engagements at this time, Peg? I know you had involvement with Iowa State.
Sure. Yes, I've served on the Iowa State University Foundation and also had some human services, as Libby had mentioned, with Unity Point, serving on their local and also their corporate board. Also health and human services through Child Serve and other organizations. So in the community, the board role is so important, and so many people give so much of their time to do that.
Wonderful. Thanks, Peg.
Sure.
And then Megan Beza, who is a principal professionally, and that's where we got to know each other and be colleagues. I had a position where I got to connect different leaders at principal with board opportunities. And Megan, I don't know that that's how you joined the All Exito board, but if you want to share a little bit about kind of your experience, and you're in your first year as a board chair, if I recall.
Yeah, sure. So I am board chair for Al Éxito, which is an organization focused on Latinx youth empowerment, education, access, and success in the Iowa community. This is my only board engagement, and this is my first formal board engagement as well. I have been on the board for about a year and a half, previously just a general board member, watching the organization, and stepped into this role in June in the middle of our global pandemic, and we continue to lead in this space. This is my only engagement, lots to focus on being a young board and a new leader as well.
Wonderful, thank you. I always love an all-female panel, I'm not gonna lie. Women power this morning. That was not intentional, it just happened. So I wanted to maybe start with Libby. As a seasoned leader of a high-functioning board, you and I discussed some of the best practices that boards can put in place before a crisis, ready to lean in. So can you share a little bit more about maybe some of those things that you have utilized, really have they've come in handy during this time, and then any kind of shifts that you have made to be able to effectively strategize through this crisis as a board?
Sure. Thanks, Brianne. Yes, and Mid-Iowa Health Foundation is a little different than some of the other groups probably represented on here, in that we don't do fundraising. We don't have that stress of trying to figure out what the revenue stream is. We are a private foundation that was set up from proceeds from a hospital sale many, many years ago. And so we get to have the pleasure of doing things maybe a little differently and not into such the day-to-day crisis of revenue management, although we do have to watch how the investments are handled. So that gives us some opportunity to look at more from a systemic viewpoint of what we would like to do in the community. Um, Governance has been a big part of the organization for years, well before I was on the board. And so we operate with a consent agenda to try to really allow much more time for good discussion. The consent agenda would include all the approval for all the minutes of other meetings, of other committee meetings, a lot of things that we can dump in there with one broad brush vote. And so that's allowed us then to focus much more on a strategic standpoint in our board meetings. We also use our committee structure very heavily, and a lot of the strategic ideas come up through those committees, a governance committee, a grants committee, investment, along those lines. And that's allowed us to really focus on what we would want to discuss then at our board meetings. We do a lot of pre-reads, a lot of material is sent out to board members in advance to facilitate conversation, so you're not getting hit cold right in the middle of the meeting with something we really want vibrant discussion on. And then we're also very mindful on board membership and make sure that we try to have a good lens of the community, people who are active in the community, also people who are good with investments and the audit side of things, because the financials are important. And that has allowed us to have some rich dialogue as well. As we were confronted with COVID in March, we, the good old word, we pivoted like everybody else. We immediately, our bylaws allowed for electronic and virtual meetings, but we passed resolutions verifying that we would have all of our meetings be virtual, and we re-up that every quarter. So we do come back and look at that. We also put in a resolution that changed the meaning of quorum. In the event that we had a majority of our members who were ill and could not participate, we changed our quorum to be the number of people present at a meeting, because at that point in March, we weren't sure what this pandemic was going to do to board membership. So kind of unusual things like that.
Well,
our executive committee started to meet more frequently, and now we meet monthly, and we use that committee to help plan all of our agendas. And we also wanted to be more flexible and nimble with our partners in the community. We understand best practices in foundations around the country were to reevaluate some of the existing grants and acknowledge that maybe new programs or things that we were funding weren't going to be operating quite the same way under the pandemic. And so we allowed some flexibility and nimbleness in terms of how our grant recipients could use that money. If it meant maybe something more on a general operations standpoint than on a program, we were willing to do that under this point in time. One of the best practices we always put in place is we always do an annual look back into what worked well for our organization the last year and what could we do better, take learnings away from that. And that's really important this year because we're in the middle of building a new strategic plan for the next 3 to 4 years. So that's been extremely helpful in this environment as well. And then I think lastly, one of the unusual things is we looked at our investment policy with both the grant committee and our investment committee and determined that we were going to spend a bit more this year because of the pandemic and the crisis that some of the agencies within the community had. And so we actually stepped up some of our grant making to exceed what our normal investment policy and grant making policy would allow, because we knew these were unusual times.
Thank you, Libby. We so appreciate the partnership of Mid-Iowa Health Foundation and your team. And when I was looking for guests today, you really came out as someone who Mid-Iowa Health Foundation was excited to have leading the organization with them, the staff. And I wanted to call out the consent agenda item that you shared, because that's something we talk about in our board basics training. And Angie, I know you're quick on the pasting of links. So if you don't mind, Angie, giving us maybe a link to what the consent agenda is from Board Source or something, so that folks who aren't familiar with that strategy, basically, all those committee reports and some of the, standard information where you would just get talked at is really put in bulk at the front of the meeting, or some do it at the end, and then voted on kind of as a package deal. And you can pull out different items to have discussion or vote separately on them, but really it helps to free up a lot of the time that I don't want to say is wasted on committee reports, but you ever feel like, oh, I was just in a meeting that could have been an email. I hate that feeling. And so it really moves those meetings from feeling like that to feeling like, oh, this was an opportunity for me to engage and strategize with my governing peers. So we love that technique. And I love some of the other ideas that you had about recognizing this moment in virtual voting and quorum being different. I think that was really helpful to hear. So thanks.
Thank you.
We'll hopefully have some time for some interplay and dialogue among our speakers, but I wanted to move to Peg because when I think of you, Peg, I think of the word innovation. And I know that the zoo has been challenged. We've heard from Amanda Newsom, who's on the call, about the different ways that the zoo continues to innovate and create new events and new opportunities, and they've been pivoting left and right. And so I'm wondering maybe how you keep that spirit of innovation alive as a board leader. And I know you're doing some work in diversity, equity, and inclusion as well, but you're continuing to move along even when the day-to-day is so challenging. So if you could speak a little bit to that, I think that would be really interesting.
Sure. Good morning to so many friends, and thanks to the folks that are on from the board. I think the first thing that I start out with, and I believe that we have as an attitude towards everything strategic relative to our board, is first and foremost, the people who've agreed to serve on the board, we start with the assumption they want to be great board members. Okay, so then it becomes incumbent upon, as Libby said, the chair, the executive committee, and the senior leadership at the organization to really know the board members, know what business needs to be transacted by a board based on its bylaws and expectations, both internally and in the community, and then utilizing that input from those folks to also come in and give you some ideas. So make it easy for them to contribute and participate. And then secondly, tap into their creativity as well. I mean, not everything that you're going to try, especially under these situations, is going to turn out perfectly. But if you've got a belief that everybody is starting by wanting to be their best, when ideas are brought forward, I think it keeps a more open mind to stimulate that creativity, and then for board members to show up at those different events, to show up with words of encouragement and emails. But remember, everybody who's on this board, whichever board you're talking about or who's represented today, is that those folks are used to making decisions someplace else. So to be a part of that innovation and creativity is to make sure that you're cultivating that input, which they're used to, and then also giving them something to do. Libby laid out a perfect.
Sorry, 1 second. I'm just going to make sure we've got somebody on mute here because I think it's interfering with our sound. Okay, go ahead. Sorry, Peg.
So Libby laid out a classic way to approach it. I mean, best practices when you set up your meetings correctly. The real thing is to make sure that you're providing opportunity for discussion and dialogue. And I know that Libby's been a long-term, and myself have served on lots of boards. Megan, you're starting out. My one piece of advice to every board chair and every executive committee is make sure that you're picking up the phone, calling your board members, just asking them what are you thinking, what ideas do you have, and then making sure you're always keeping that information and sharing it with other board members and also the senior staff. So just keeping that conversation, that flow, and that respect for innovation amongst everybody, in addition to thinking that you have to do all of it in-house or as the executive committee on a board.
Great. So I'm hearing you talk about leaning into those committees and those relationships.
Absolutely.
And I know that my husband actually serves on the Zoo Conservation Committee, and you guys had a great opportunity to bring forth different ideas. And then how do you kind of filter through those ideas and decide what is a strategic initiative that you're going to move forward with, and what might you keep on the bench or in a file for maybe later? How do you sort through all the good ideas that you might be getting from your incredible leaders?
Sure. Well, first I would offer up, in talking about your husband serving on the Conservation Committee, that's an innovative idea that I would encourage folks to think about. First, you have your core board. And those are people that really want to commit to all the expectations that are laid out for board members in your bylaws. And there are some, you know, depending on the rigorness of that, not everybody at certain stages of their life are ready to be a full board member, but you can do a tremendous amount of leadership development, innovative ideas, and really partnership building in the community. If you look at emerging leaders or established leaders in our communities and ask them to serve as community insight and innovation members to your committees. It has commitment, they're engaged, but they don't have to be full board members with that full-time commitment. You get a richness of that. What we then do is we feed that into the committees for them to first set the priorities and come forward with recommendations. We're really implementing a strong committee structure at this point. Those are consulted with regards to the executive committee, but we do not really stop that. We really work with the staff for their professional input and also evaluation of the application of time, resources, conflicts with any other priorities that we have, and then we bring it to the full board. And when we bring recommendations to the full board, there may be one single or there may be a couple that they will have to choose from, so therefore then they have to exercise their decision-making capacity. And we always try to put every project that we have first through the filter of mission, and then we try to keep that strategic aspect to it and make sure that we can talk about why this idea fits with our strategies as well as our mission. And like Libby stated, we're going through a brand new strategic planning process as we figure out COVID and everything else, just like everyone else on this call. But you constantly have to keep your strategies in front of your board, and don't make the assumption that they can memorize your strategic plan. So again, you're bringing in creative ideas, put the rationale with how it fits with mission and your strategic plan, and then engage your board both in the creation of and the evaluation of those types of creative ideas. Of course, you have to do all the background stuff. What's the budget? How many hours? All of that. Yeah. But we can sift through that. The real thing we try to lead with is impact and value. Value primarily to the community and the stakeholders of which our mission is, which is wildlife, and also the metro, and anyone who wants to be engaged in conservation and also just have an experience at the zoo.
Great, thank you, Peg.
Sure.
I'll pivot now to Megan, and I know, like we said, you have a very different organization, a younger leadership team, and I know that Alexito has also been, thinking about governance a little bit differently, and as a culturally specific organization, really kind of maybe leaning into new models that have less to do with maybe the hierarchies that maybe more, I don't want to say traditional board structures have adopted, but talk to me a little bit about maybe in your first year, what are you recognizing? You also have a founder who is your executive director, which has another dimension of community relationship. And so tell me a little bit about what you are doing right now in this moment to sort of meet the overwhelming needs that you're seeing from the community, and balance or attempt to balance addressing that, and kind of what are you leaning into in this moment?
So I'd say, I think the first thing that we're focused on is our board is it's small, it's lean, and I think that's very true of our organization as well in terms of our staff and our ability to kind of have a nice spread. However, my goodness, our staff, they are incredibly powerful in terms of their reach, in terms of getting creative and developing those creative ideas to meet the need that's now in the community created by the pandemic. And so I think from my approach, being a new board member and also recognizing that we have to operate differently, and this would be true in any year, just operating differently as an organization, because we're in a different place. We're about 10 years old, but there's still a lot to be built, and it's almost like building the brick road as you're walking along it, and that's kind of what we're doing here. I work with the executive director in more of a partnership. I'm there to try to support her, hear her ideas, understand where she feels our scope is and where she feels that reach is. At the same time saying, hey, how can we potentially partner differently in order for you to have that reach and impact that you're so desiring, that we know the community needs. And so we were really thankful in this, in the last few months, to receive a couple of investments from organizations around Des Moines in order to work with other local nonprofits to reach the community at large. So for example, with the foundation receiving an investment to work with Proteus and the American Friends Service Committee, that was really helpful to be able to meet the basic needs of our youth families, right? Rent, utilities, place to stay, right? Food in some respect.
Yeah.
And so we kind of shifted from what do the students need, what does our programming look like in March, to how are we providing for their families? How are they getting their needs met? And let's build out that baseline, figure out what they need in this moment. Our executive director and staff were out there, providing meals to families of the students that we work with, again, just to kind of get them through that immediate impact. And now we are moving to, how do we do this work in a virtual space? What does that mean for our programming? And from the governance side of things, we have to look at our bylaws and understand, is there anything limiting us in being able to pivot and be flexible for the needs of the community, and in order to create that programming that is so necessary in this virtual space at this time. So we've had an excellent board willing to make those changes, and again, being able to pivot, but I think we're in that space already because of how small our organization is and how kind of all hands on deck our philosophy is. And when we look at kind of that governance model, I'd say one of the priorities that we have is always focusing on how are we building out the leadership development of our youth, but then when we bring board members on, how are we ensuring that there's mentoring happening there, that we're growing the leadership capabilities of our board members as well. And we're very lucky in that we've had a couple of experienced board members join our organization in this particular year. And so that has really helped us as well, because you have this synergy of board members who have run events and are still honing in on the fundraising and figuring out what we can do to become excellent in that space. And you have seasoned board members who are coming in with their perspectives from other organizations, really helping us get better too. So I'm really grateful to have such a good cohesive board this year, especially it being my first year leading. And I think we're going to get through it together.
That's great, Megan. I love what you said about that mentoring. That's core to the mission that Alexito has, but we talk about that in our board basics, the idea of assigning a board buddy, somebody who is more experienced to somebody who's a newcomer, even to the organization. They may have served on other boards before, but they might not know the organization as well, or have been through that strategic planning that happened a year and a half ago, or whatever. So that's a great strategy. And I appreciate you lifting up the partnerships and the fact that you're thinking about that hierarchy of needs, your youth development. But if families are not able to eat, they're not able to actively engage in your programming. And you've been able to use those touch points, from what I understand, also to build connections with DMPS and school districts to help them understand kind of more systemically the needs of the families that you're serving. So
Absolutely.
I think that's powerful.
All credit to the executive director. I feel like she's superwoman in terms of she must replicate herself. There must be 5 of her in order to do the work that she's doing for the community and building out our kind of brand, so to speak, in what we do and sharing that message. So and I'm sure I think we have many friends and advocates on the phone. So just want to thank you all too for your support as we get through, help the community get through this time.
Wonderful. Well, I think we might have just a few more minutes. If anybody has questions in the chat, feel free to and ask them there. But panelists, do you have any questions for each other, or anything that you wanted to call out or piggyback on from what the others have said?
Well, Brenda, this is Peg, and I would really emphasize what both Libby and Megan have said about your staff is critical. Hire great staff. And always remember, a board is about governance and support, and really being friend raisers out in the community as well as fundraisers. but the staff really has to run the organization, and many times boards like to creep into that. So you really need to keep that context of governance and what your role and responsibility is, but make sure then that you have great staff in place and to support them and understand your organization well enough. And I think all of our organizations that are represented today need 5 of the executive directors and their senior staffs,
Yeah.
as Megan's mentioned.
Yeah. Well, and you talked a little bit, Peg, about sending those notes of appreciation. And,
Right.
we've been seeing some executive transitions during this time. We've been seeing a lot of executive directors just with the weight of the world on them. And
Right.
so, how have you been? How have you been supporting, and this is to all of you, your ED or your staff in newer, different ways? I know, Libby, you were even talking about opening up board meetings with a moment of reflection or just a little bit of a different tone. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Sure.
And Peg
Yeah,
and
I
Megan, if
meant to
you have
talk.
anything?
Thanks. I meant to talk about that a little earlier. Yeah, one of the things we have started doing, and it's thanks to our small but mighty staff who are great, and I think they're on the call as well. We now are opening our board meetings with a moment of reflection, just to kind of set a nice tone and give everybody a place to take a deep breath. And I've seen that in a couple other organizations I'm involved with as well. That seems to be kind of the new way, and really interested in how people around the virtual table are feeling. We also, as a board, want to make sure that we are doing wellness checks with our staff. There are so many things going on in the community right now, and people are being torn in so many different directions that we want to make sure that in our case, our staff really knows that the board is wanting to make sure there's some work-life balance, not some, but a good amount of work-life balance, and that we just can't let everything be 24/7. So as realistically as we can these days, we are trying to do that as well. And the moment of reflection also allows us really to check in with everybody else on our board. We're a small board, but there are people who are involved in a lot of things in our community right now, pretty high profile involvement. So we want to make sure that they know that we're supporting them and that whatever we can do to help them both on our board and with their day-to-day functions elsewhere, we're here to do that.
Can you just really quickly, Libby, talk a little bit about what a wellness check means? Is that at the executive committee, just, on a scale of 1 to 1,000, how overwhelmed are you? Or
It's really a combination. It's definitely the executive committee asking, but we're also asking at the board meetings, and then asking, we've got a good, honest, open dialogue between board and staff, and we're really looking for, tell us, is there too much going on? Is the board asking to do things that just are make work that you don't need to do right now? Are you convening so many conversations that it's getting draining to you? How are you finding ways to relax at home? Are you finding some me time? You've got, your kids you're trying to school, all of that. So we're trying, yes, it's mindful. And I think individually board members are also reaching out in not so formal of ways as well.
Yeah. Peg, on the strategy side, I know at INHF you have a sabbatical system that is really built into how you're thinking about staff burnout. When
Right.
you reach a certain number of years, you get a certain extra weeks. And I know the executive director has had sabbaticals in that model, and maybe now isn't the time to introduce a sabbatical, but something maybe to think about, a strategy kind of long term around preventing burnout, renewing the staff. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. What we do is then they usually apply, and then they have an opportunity to go out and spend their time with that. Some sabbaticals, some organizations are paid, some are not. Maybe some of you have found that if you've had pastors after a few years that they can do that. We also try to do that both not only at Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation, but also at Blank Park Zoo, so that individuals can keep up their skill levels, their passions, and then also get reinvigorated and re-engaged and re-energized. Let's all face it, we're going to have to really support our staff and our board members in not only just the current months, but in the months to come. We're going to see many, many after effects once you're out of crisis, if that ever happens, to where you're coming back and trying to be a part of that. I think sabbaticals maybe are something everyone should think about right now and plan for in your strategic planning process, because it's like anytime you go into a skid. What you're supposed to do is steer into that, not fight it. And I would really say any of your great ideas that you thought you should have done in the past, now's the time to really look at them and say, is there any way possible for the betterment of our organization, for our community, which we all have to serve, and for the people who help day to day do that, your staff, is this the time, no matter how difficult, necessary to implement that? I learned that from Dr. Greg Joffrey at Iowa State when he first came as president of the university. Everybody was hemorrhaging across the country at institutions of higher ed. Budgets were tight. He had to cut millions of dollars, but he put aside almost $6 million at that time to give special money to what he evaluated as 6 of the rising stars across the entire university. People thought he was crazy, but I tell you what it did for retention, what it did as a message across the entire organization of using investment dollars to really demonstrate to your serious professional staff that you care about them. It was excellent. And it's been a message in budgeting and retention of great talent that I've always learned. So I think sabbaticals are very useful.
Yeah, I've heard of it as in succession planning as well, as a way to call up those leaders when you take away a position for a while,
Right.
to rejuvenate. Who else is going to have to step up and learn new things and flex and stretch in different ways? So that's great. Thanks, Peg. Megan,
Exactly.
We'll be sending folks to a breakout in just a few minutes. Anything you wanted to add there?
I'd actually like to take the opportunity to ask a question, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
Since I, very, again, fresh in this space, when you have those concepts sound fantastic, and I would love to be able to support our staff in being able to take that break and step away. But I wonder, when you have a team that's incredibly passionate, how do you get that message across, right? Like, how do you really say, hey, I actually mean it. Please take some time for you. If you haven't heard that, please, do it. Because I can almost like beg and plead, but when the need is so great, how do you help the helpers take a step back and recognize what they need in order to refresh and then continue to help? Any advice there?
I think one of the ways is you build it into their personal goals each year, and it's part of their annual evaluation. If they're to the point where they won't take the time, I think it's build it into an expectation that this is as important to your performance as everything else you're doing. So that's hard. That's a painful conversation because they're living and breathing the work, but at the same time, that shows the importance of it from the leadership to the staff members.
Great. And that's a great segue into next session on the 21st. We'll have Mary Sellers, who's presenting. You all are welcome back anytime, I know. But she'll be talking a lot about, and we'll have an executive roundtable to kind of have the executives share what they're doing and how they're coping and leading through this time. So that's a wonderful segue into kind of our next topic and on the third week. So if we could go to the next slide, Bridget, we'll invite folks to select their breakout rooms. So thinking about our discussion questions, what techniques and tips do you have for engaging with your board through this challenging period? How do you get support to make strategic decisions? I have the room numbers here, so we invite you to change your name to put the number in the front, and that just helps me to move you out if you want to participate in breakout rooms, and then we'll get you going. So while I'm doing that, Peg, Megan, Libby, any kind of final thoughts that you would want to share with the group today?
I think just a round of applause for everybody who is on the call, who's dealing with what we're dealing with due to 2020 and all that it's thrown to us, and appreciate your interest in the topics. I think I can probably guess that all three of us and others who are leading boards are happy to serve as resources for you, not just in this short amount of time, but anytime. Feel free to contact, I think, certainly myself, I can't put words in other people's mouths, but I'm guessing Peg and Megan are probably there as well.
Use the Community Foundation. Excellent resource, especially now. And no matter how much experience you have or don't have relative to a board, they have value. And I would really encourage more and more people to reach out to them for the tremendous resources. Brianna and others are just tremendous.
Well, I didn't pay her to say it, but
Nope, you did not. I've used it.
Great. Well, I am going to fly folks out into their breakout rooms. Thank you so much to our presenters today. I'll let you go. And then
Thank you.
it looks like our breakout room 1 is pretty small. So if we want to move folks, or you want to move, just come back and let me know. So I'll open those rooms. Thanks again to the presenters, and we'll see you back here in about 15 minutes, those who are going to the breakouts.